This video is about the end of seeking for spiritual enlightenment. We have this idea that enlightenment is going to happen to us and that it is a thing that we can get. And after we get this thing, we will be forever wise and happy. I don't know about you, but I definitely had this idea, and it was the greatest barrier to actually awakening, or whatever you want to call it. We have done this kind of wanting throughout our lives. Perhaps we thought that, what if we had enough money that we would be happy? Or if I had the right relationship, I would be happy. Or a million friends on Facebook, perhaps that would make me happy. Or perhaps we get a little spiritual and think that, well, if I was only more mindful, I would be happy. Or if I could meditate longer. Or if I did enough therapy, I would be happy. And we may get some of what we want when we strive for these things, and we may feel some happiness for a while. But we find that eventually we come back to this same sense of dissatisfaction. And next we might come to enlightenment and think, okay, this is it. This is the big one. If I get enlightenment, I will be happy. It's often called the last desire or the final desire. So you seek enlightenment, but you find that it's elusive. So you try harder and harder, and you still find it elusive. Enlightenment is the same trap as all the other desires. It's simply the ego seeking fulfillment out there in external circumstances or internal states. Your spirituality or spiritual seeking may be the deepest illusion running around in your head. It may be your core ego identity. There's an interesting old Zen story about a Zen student that tells his teacher that he's going to meditate in the mountains and become enlightened. And the teacher says, okay, but please write me a letter every month to let me know how it's going. The student agrees and sets out. For 3 years, the teacher receives detailed letters saying things like, I have reached the supreme knowing of the absolute, and ultimate reality has been deeply penetrated and known by me. Or, I am one with everything. The teacher reads the letters and kind of with disgust and tosses them in the garbage. A year passes and no letters are received by the teacher. The teacher writes the student and asks, why aren't you continuing to send letters to me? A reply is received that says, who wants to know? And the Zen teacher smiles. This story is actually a setup for the egoic mind. The mind hears the story and it sounds like great things are happening to the student. You may have been surprised when you heard that the teacher was not pleased and threw the letters in the garbage. The story points to a deep teaching. At first, the students' reports were accomplishments of personal will or the egoic will. These are all things that the ego desires, supreme knowing, ultimate reality, interconnection, and so on. When he eventually replies, who wants to know? It is showing the idea that the self wanting to attain something has fallen away. There isn't anybody there to have gained or attained anything. He could have written back, nothing much has happened to nobody. The notion that there is a person seeking enlightenment eventually falls away, and we see behind the illusion of a separate self. There will be this impulse to seek that comes from wholeness, but this isn't really seeking. There's still an aspiration, you could say, for awakening to what's true, but there's not a notion of this making me a better person. Instead, it's more like an impulse of consciousness to become self-aware. For decades, I was an adamant seeker, and I slowly discovered that this was the greatest barrier to actually truly awakening, but I didn't see it at the time. The end of seeking was the beginning of a deeper process for me. I trained with many teachers, read many books, and practiced a variety of methods You could say that I really explored the bottom of the mountain when I was actually trying to get to the top. I made it a real intellectual process. And when I would have spiritual experiences that contradicted my intellectual understanding, I would switch teachers or traditions even. I wanted more and better experiences, and I wanted them to last. I lived with monks, went on dozens of meditation and yoga retreats, and traveled the world. I did not realize that I was trapped in an idea of enlightenment. I was an egoic self seeking betterment through spiritual practices. I was seeking happiness by acquiring something out there, which in my case was a spiritual experience. Now, don't worry if this sounds familiar and you are doing this. This is natural. Even if you know that this is something that happens, it will likely still happen. If you try not to do it, it is simply more seeking, trying not to seek, so that you can eventually get what you want. You might have transformative realizations, but at some point the me jumps in and thinks, I've attained something. This is great. I'm getting something out of this. So it is important to recognize that realizations are only important in terms of how much of the self gets let go of. It's all about letting go of the egoic self. Now this sounds like a paradox, and it is. Within the idea of oneself is this insufficiency. So it's always seeking something. Eventually, often in like a midlife crisis or some other traumatic event, the self starts seeking spiritual stuff. This is, like I said, the ultimate desire for the ego. Remember, this is not good or bad, it just is. You don't need to get rid of the seeking or pretend it's not there. You can't just switch it off. That's just another form of self-delusion. The seeking energy will be there and you can't get rid of it. The best you can do is to use that seeking energy and momentum in useful ways. You are suffering because you believe that this moment is not enough just as it is. Seeking is always trying to attain something to make this moment and all future moments better. Seeking is always trying to find fulfillment and happiness somewhere else other than what is right in front of you in the moment. This wanting energy can be turned upside down or diverted to stop seeking external things or internal experiences. We can use the seeking energy to see things, see that they're impermanent, that they are temporary and not in the long run satisfying. When you see that all of this is not ultimately satisfying, the me wonders, what do I do now? And when you really get this, the me faces a dilemma. The seeker's still there, but it doesn't know what to do next. It knows that it cannot find fulfillment from the outside objects or internal experiences, but it doesn't know what to do next. When you really see or grok this, there's a natural, spontaneous stopping. And there isn't anywhere for the seeking energy to go, so it just stops. When you stop cherishing illusions, then the energy of seeking can be diverted to true awakening. Zen masters quoted as saying, "Do not seek the truth, simply cease cherishing illusions." The Buddha put it this way: rather than continuing to seek the truth, simply let go of your views. When the egoic seeking energy stops, there is a natural stillness. It is not a stillness created through meditation practices like following the breath. It comes from looking at the nature of experience and seeing that all this stuff that I'm seeking is impermanent and unsatisfactory. The sutras say, to seek is to suffer. To seek nothing is bliss. When you seek nothing, you're on the path. In other words, you do everything you can to attain spiritual enlightenment until there's nothing more to do. When every technique, every teaching, every method has been tried and applied, and you're utterly tired of it all, that's when true spiritual transformation can happen. The spiritual awakening process is an ongoing kind of undoing of the ego. The ego undoes itself by means of relentless struggle and desire for something more. And when the ego realizes that there's nowhere to go, it all stops. There's surrender. And when there's this surrender, then true awakening can unfold. When surrender occurs, there is a stepping into the mystery, into the unknown. And this is the last thing that the ego wants, that the seeker wants. To the egoic seeker, stopping is the death of the seeker. It's difficult for the egoic seeker to stop wanting. After all, who would you be without the seeking and wanting? How would you know yourself or what to do? In a way, it is often said, you must die before you die so that you can truly live. As Eckhart Tolle says, death is a stripping away of all that is not you. The secret of life is to die before you die and find that there is no death. So here's a practice, very concrete practice, to cease cherishing illusions. As Adyashanti says, seeking truth can be a game, complete with a new identity as truth seeker, fueled by new ideas and beliefs. But ceasing to cherish illusions is no game. It is a gritty and intimate form of deconstructing yourself down to nothing. Get rid of all your illusions, and what's left is truth. You don't find truth as much as you stumble upon it when you cast away all your illusions. End of quote. The end of seeking is itself the fulfillment of what you were looking for. It is really hard for the ego to accept this. It is a realization and not an intellectual understanding. Your ego may be listening to this talk and saying to itself, well, that's all fine, Stephen, but I'm different. I'm going to have the most mind-bending experience, such that I will be eternally blissful. That is when I will stop seeking. That one little thought can keep you in the game, can keep the seeking game going. Trying to attain something that will last forever goes against the law or principle of impermanence. It is impossible for something that is attained to last because the nature of that which arises is impermanent. It always falls away. We can and do see this over and over. In fact, we all know this. The dilemma is that our ego does not want to know this, even though it's plain and obvious. When we end the search for anything, we find fulfillment and peace in what is unfolding in the present moment. Things are now seen for what they are, kind of mysterious unfolding of events and thoughts and perceptions and memories, ever-changing and empty of any independent existence and without a doer. I would like to conclude with a quote from Adyashanti. Now don't think that awakening is the end. Awakening is the end of seeking, the end of the seeker, but it is the beginning of a life lived from your true nature. I hope you found this video helpful in your journey and your meditation and mindfulness path. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below. Thank you, and see you next time.